The room was too bright for early morning. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, reflecting off polished floors and pressed uniforms. The kind of place designed to feel orderly, efficient, and neutral, where personal history was meant to stay outside the door. She stood near the back of the hall, shoulders relaxed, hands folded behind her, listening more than watching. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about her. No sharp edges, no swagger. Just another uniform among many, neatly pressed, boots clean, posture correct but unassuming. The kind of presence people overlooked without realizing they'd done it. A small group near the front laughed quietly. It wasn't loud enough to draw attention, but it was deliberate enough to be shared. A glance passed between them. A tilt of the head. A smirk aimed just slightly in her direction. One of them whispered something. Another replied under his breath, amused. "That metal?" A soft chuckle followed. She didn't react. "Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe the channel and let me know in the comments where are you watching from. It helps more than you know." The metal rested against her chest, catching the light when she shifted her weight. It wasn't oversized, not flashy, just a simple ribbon and insignia worn exactly where it was supposed to be. To anyone who didn't know better, it looked ordinary. That was the problem. The briefing continued. A senior officer spoke at the front, voice steady, outlining schedules, assignments, the usual rotation of responsibility. Names were called, notes were taken. Chairs creaked softly as people adjusted their stance. The whispers didn't stop. "She doesn't look like..." "Probably ceremonial. Must have been a mistake." The assumptions stacked quietly, built on posture, tone, and the unspoken idea that certain things were earned by a certain kind of person. She had learned long ago not to interrupt ignorance while it was still talking. She focused instead on her breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. A habit learned in places far louder than this room, places where attention was currency and silence was survival. The officer paused. "Before we wrap up," he said, scanning the room, "there's something we need to address." The murmurs faded. His eyes settled briefly on her, then moved on. "Not yet. We have a transfer joining us temporarily," he continued. "Active duty, assigned for oversight and coordination." A few heads turned. People straightened instinctively. Transfers always carried weight, even before details were known. "She's already here," the officer added. That was when his gaze returned to her and held. The room followed. Conversations died mid-thought. Smiles faltered. Someone near the front shifted awkwardly, suddenly aware of how exposed laughter could feel under the wrong light. She met the attention calmly, stepping forward only when motion was clearly expected. No rush, no hesitation, just precision. Her boots stopped exactly where protocol demanded. She stood at ease, chin level, eyes forward. "This is Captain Mira Cade," the officer said. A ripple moved through the room. Not loud, just enough. "Captain, active duty." The whispers changed shape. The officer continued, voice even. "She's here to evaluate readiness and assist with integration on the upcoming operation." Someone swallowed audibly, but the officer wasn't finished. "And before anyone asks," he added, gesturing subtly toward her chest, "yes, that medal is hers." Silence followed, not the awkward kind, the heavy kind, the kind that presses down on assumptions until they crack. She remained still, because the truth had not been spoken yet, and when it was, she knew, the room would never sound the same again. The silence didn't lift right away. It settled into the room, dense and uncomfortable, forcing everyone to sit with what they had just learned, or thought they had learned. Captain, active duty, oversight. Still, none of that explained the medal. Mira Cade felt the shift before she saw it. The way shoulders squared, the way eyes lingered just a fraction longer than before. Curiosity replaced amusement, but it wasn't respect yet. Not fully. Respect, she knew, came later. The officer cleared his throat and returned to the briefing as if nothing unusual had happened. Slides advanced. Schedules resumed. Words filled the space again, but they landed differently now. People listened with half their attention still fixed on her, on the ribbon that had sparked the quiet laughter earlier. When the briefing ended, chairs scraped back in unison. A few people approached her immediately, polite, professional, careful in the way people became when they realized they might have misjudged someone. "Welcome," one of them said. Didn't realize we were getting a captain. Mira nodded once. It wasn't announced. That medal, another added, trying to sound casual. It's not one you see every day. No, Mira said evenly. It isn't. They waited, clearly hoping she would explain more. She didn't. After years of service, she had learned the difference between curiosity and entitlement. She owed no one her story just to ease their discomfort. She excused herself and walked down the corridor alone, the sound of boots echoing faintly against tile. Her stride was measured, unhurried, the kind of walk built from repetition and long corridors far from home. Outside, the air was cooler, cleaner. She paused near the edge of the parade ground, letting the breeze move across her face. For a moment, the present thinned and memory pressed in. Not images, not faces, just sensations, heat, weight, the smell of dust and burned metal. The sound of breathing through fabric pulled tight across the mouth. She pushed it back gently. The medal had been awarded 3 years earlier. Not in a grand ceremony, not with family in attendance, just a small room, a commanding officer and a citation read in a voice that didn't waver. Extraordinary valor under direct fire. Actions taken without regard for personal safety. Lives saved. Mission completed. The details had been classified at the time. Some still were. What mattered wasn't the language on the paper. It was the cost behind it. She hadn't worn the medal for months after receiving it, not out of shame, out of practicality. Medals drew attention. Attention led to questions. Questions led to stories she didn't want told by people who had never been there. But regulations were regulations, and this assignment required visibility. Later that afternoon, she met with the unit leadership. The tone was different now, formal, correct. They asked about her background in careful roundabout ways, experience, areas of operation, training focus. Mira answered precisely and briefly. Yes. No. Limited relevance here. One of them finally gestured toward the medal again, unable to help himself. If you don't mind me asking, ma'am, what was it for? The room held its breath. Mira considered the question, not because she was unsure of the answer, but because she understood the weight of timing. It was awarded for an extraction, she said. A recovery operation. Combat? Someone asked. Yes. Another pause. Multiple casualties? Multiple, she confirmed. They waited for more. That's all you need to know, she finished. No one pushed further. By the end of the day, word had spread. Not facts, not details, just awareness. The laughter from that morning didn't return. Conversations shifted when she entered a room. People watched their tone, their posture, their assumptions. Still, not everyone adjusted. That evening, as she crossed the parking lot, she heard it again. A voice behind her. Lower this time, less confident. Still don't see it. Mira stopped and turned slowly. The man froze, realizing too late that he'd been heard. See what? She asked calmly. He hesitated, then tried to recover. No offense, ma'am, just some medals come from being in the right place at the right time. Mira studied him. His stance, his hands, the slight tension in his shoulders. You're right, she said. He relaxed a fraction. You have to be in the right place, she continued, at the wrong moment. She held his gaze just long enough for the words to land. Then she turned and walked away. Behind her, the parking lot fell quiet, and somewhere in the building a request was being processed, one that would make explaining the medal unavoidable, not because she wanted recognition, but because the truth, once set in motion, had a way of demanding space. And when it arrived, it would not be gentle. The request moved faster than Mira expected. By the next morning, an official notice appeared on the unit's internal board. Mandatory assembly. Full attendance, dress uniform, no explanation. Speculation filled the gaps immediately. Some thought it was an inspection. Others guessed a reprimand or a change in command. A few looked in Mira's direction when they spoke, then quickly looked away again. She read the notice once and returned to her work. She already knew. The hall was fuller this time. Every seat was taken, every uniform sharp. The air carried a tension that hadn't been there before. Not fear exactly, but anticipation mixed with unease. People sensed something was coming, even if they couldn't name it. Mira stood where she had before, near the back, hands behind her, expression neutral. The senior officer entered with 2 others she didn't recognize. Their presence alone shifted the atmosphere. One wore the insignia of a higher command. The other carried a folder held carefully as if its contents mattered more than ceremony. The room came to attention. The officer waited until the silence settled completely. "At ease," he said. "This won't take long, but it will require your full attention." His gaze swept the room once before stopping on Mira. "Captain Cade," he said, "step forward." She did. Every movement was precise, no rush, no hesitation. She stopped exactly where protocol required and stood at attention, eyes forward. The folder was opened. "We've become aware," the officer continued, "that there has been some confusion regarding the nature of the commendation worn by Captain Cade." A ripple moved through the room. Small, uncontrolled. The officer raised a hand and it vanished. "This confusion ends now," he began to read. The operation had taken place overseas during a window so narrow it barely existed on paper. Intelligence had been incomplete, conditions unstable, extraction timelines measured in minutes rather than hours. A convoy had been hit, survivors scattered, communications lost. Captain Cade had been attached in an advisory capacity. When the situation collapsed, she stayed. She coordinated movement under fire, established a defensive perimeter, and moved injured personnel one by one across open ground while return fire pinned hostile forces in place. When the final transport arrived, it was already taking damage. She boarded last. The officer paused briefly, letting the room absorb the weight of the words. "Captain." Cade's actions resulted in the successful recovery of all surviving personnel. He continued. Despite sustaining injuries, she remained operational until mission completion. No one moved, no one breathed. The laughter from the first morning felt like a distant, embarrassing memory. The officer closed the folder. "That medal," he said evenly, "was not awarded lightly. It represents leadership under direct threat, discipline under chaos, and commitment beyond expectation." He turned fully toward Mira. "Captain Cade," he said, "thank you for your service." The room snapped to attention. Every soldier, every chair empty now. The sound was unified, sharp, absolute. Mira returned the salute, face composed, heart steady. She felt no triumph, no vindication, only a quiet finality. This was never about proving anything. It was about correcting a narrative before it hardened into something untrue. After the assembly, the building felt different. Not warmer, not friendlier, but aligned. People nodded when they passed her. Some stopped to speak. A few apologized without trying to excuse themselves. "I didn't know," one said quietly. Mira met his eyes. "You weren't supposed to." That evening, she sat alone on the edge of the parade ground as the light faded, boots planted in the grass, uniform jacket folded beside her. Recognition had a strange aftertaste, necessary, uncomfortable. She had learned long ago that respect earned publicly often came with private distance. She accepted that. What mattered was that the truth had been spoken cleanly, without embellishment, and that the room, once filled with doubt, had corrected itself without being told to. Still, she knew better than to believe this was the end of it. Understanding was not the same as acceptance, and while every soldier had stood at attention that day, not all of them had finished adjusting their assumptions. The quiet had returned, but this time it carried weight. The days that followed were quieter, but not easier. Respect had replaced mockery, but it came wrapped in caution. Conversations stopped when Mira entered rooms, then restarted with careful neutrality once she passed. People who had once laughed now weighed every word, unsure where the invisible lines had always been. She didn't correct them. She had learned early in her career that overcorrection bred resentment, and resentment was louder than ignorance. Instead, she worked. She reviewed readiness reports, walked the motor pool, spent long hours with junior leaders, listening more than speaking. She asked questions that didn't accuse but revealed gaps anyway. Logistics issues surfaced. Training shortcuts quietly unraveled. The unit was capable. It just hadn't been tested the way it thought it had. The first real shift came during a field exercise. Weather turned faster than forecast. Equipment failed in small, compounding ways. A navigation error pushed one element off timeline, forcing improvisation. Stress crept in. Mira didn't raise her voice. She repositioned assets, redirected movement, adjusted spacing without explanation. When a junior officer hesitated, she didn't override him publicly. She leaned in and gave one sentence of guidance, low and exact. The exercise recovered. Later, someone muttered, "That could have gone bad." Mira nodded. "It often does." That was all she said. By the end of the week, people stopped watching her medal. They watched her decisions instead. How she positioned herself slightly off-center in meetings so she could see everyone. How she asked the quietest person in the room for input before the loudest one finished speaking. How she never took credit but always absorbed responsibility. The medal faded into the background, as it should have. One afternoon, a young enlisted woman approached her outside the admin building. Nervous, determined. "Ma'am," she said, "can I ask you something?" Mira stopped walking. "You already did." The woman swallowed. "How do you keep it from getting to you?" "Getting what?" "The looks, the doubts, being measured before you're known." Mira studied her for a moment. Not critically, accurately. "You don't stop feeling it," she said. "You stop letting it decide things." The woman nodded slowly, storing the words away like something valuable. That evening, Mira received a message from higher command. Short, direct. Her temporary assignment was being extended, not because of the medal, because of the results. She closed the message and sat back, staring at the ceiling of her quarters. Extension meant more visibility, more questions, more eyes that would try to place her into neat, comfortable categories. She accepted it anyway. Some work was worth the inconvenience. The next morning, as the unit assembled for routine formation, something subtle happened. A pause, not ordered, not signaled. Just a collective moment where movement slowed and posture straightened as she stepped into place among them. No one said anything. No one had to. Mira stood with the others, eyes forward, hands steady, the medal resting where it always had. She didn't feel pride. She felt alignment. And she understood then that the real shift hadn't happened when the truth was read aloud in a crowded hall. It had happened afterward, in the quiet moments where people chose to adjust themselves rather than demand explanation. That was harder. That was rarer. And it told her more about this unit than any briefing ever could. The assumptions hadn't vanished, but they were losing ground. And Mira knew from experience that once ground was lost honestly, it was rarely regained. The real test came without warning. It always did. The call came late in the afternoon, routed through channels that didn't leave much room for interpretation. A training operation had escalated into something closer to the real thing. A civilian contractor injured, weather closing in, timelines tightening by the minute. The unit moved fast, but uncertainty crept in around the edges. Mira listened as reports came in, her attention fixed not on what was said but on what wasn't. Gaps. Assumptions. The quiet pauses where someone hoped another voice would fill the space. She stepped forward. "Stop," she said calmly. The room stilled. "Run it again," she continued. "From the injury forward. Not the plan. The reality." They did. This time the flaws surfaced clearly. Evac routes that assumed clear skies. Redundancies that didn't exist. A reliance on timing that was already slipping away. Mira adjusted the sequence without drama. She reassigned roles, redistributed weight, and shortened the chain of communication until decisions could move faster than doubt. No one argued. They moved. The operation stabilized. The injured contractor was evacuated safely. Equipment was secured. The unit returned tired, quiet, and unmistakably changed. Later, as gear was stowed and reports were filed, the senior officer approached Mira. "You could have taken over," he said. "You didn't." Mira met his gaze. "They needed to learn it would work without me in front." He nodded slowly. "That's leadership." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. That night, the atmosphere shifted again, not toward reverence, toward ease. Laughter returned, softer and less performative. Conversations included her without circling her. The careful distance eased into something more honest. Someone joked about coffee. Another complained about boots that never broke in properly. Ordinary things. Mira listened and allowed herself a small exhale. Later, alone in her quarters, she removed the medal and placed it carefully in its case. Not to hide it, just to let her shoulders rest without its weight. She thought about the day it had been awarded. The faces she hadn't seen again. The ones she carried with her regardless. Recognition was fleeting. Responsibility was not. The next morning a notice appeared. The unit would be standing down from heightened evaluation status. Mira's role would transition from oversight to advisory support. The mission had been completed. The adjustments had taken hold. People gathered in small clusters, reading the notice, nodding to one another. Someone caught her eye and gave a small, respectful smile, not because of what she wore, because of what she had done here. As formation assembled one last time under her watch, Mira took her place without ceremony. The air was clear, the ground steady beneath her boots. When the command was given, the unit moved as one, not out of obligation, out of trust. Mira stood among them, no longer an unknown variable, no longer a symbol to be interpreted, just a soldier. And as the formation dismissed and people broke away into the rhythms of their day, she understood something quietly, completely. The metal had opened the door, but consistency had kept it open. And that, more than recognition or silence or standing attention, was the measure that mattered most. Only one thing remained, not a test, not a revelation, just the closing of a chapter that had finally said everything it needed to say. The departure was understated. No announcement, no formal send-off, just a line item on the schedule quietly removed and a name reassigned back to its original command. Mira Cade packed her kit the same way she always had, methodical, precise, without ceremony. The unit went about its morning routine as usual, but something lingered beneath the surface. Not tension, not uncertainty, awareness. As Mira stepped onto the parade ground one last time, boots crunching lightly against gravel, conversations slowed. People didn't stop what they were doing. They didn't need to. They noticed. She took her place in formation, exactly where she'd been told to stand, posture aligned with everyone else. The metal rested against her uniform, unmoving, no longer the focal point it once had been. The commanding officer approached the front. "This will be brief," he said. He didn't reference her directly at first. He spoke instead about readiness, responsibility, and the obligation to correct assumptions before they hardened into weakness. His words were measured, deliberate. Then he turned. "Captain Cade," he said. Mira stepped forward. "This unit was evaluated," he continued, "and it adapted. That doesn't happen without leadership. Sometimes quiet, sometimes uncomfortable." He paused, scanning the faces in front of him. "Learn from that." Mira returned to formation without comment. The command was given. The unit came to attention. Not sharply, not theatrically, naturally. The sound carried across the ground. Clean, unified, unmistakable. Mira held her position, eyes forward, breath steady. She felt no swell of pride, no satisfaction, only completion. This chapter was closed. Later, as she walked toward the transport vehicle waiting at the edge of the base, a few people approached her. Not to apologize, not to praise, just to acknowledge. "Thank you," one said quietly. Mira nodded. "Keep the standard." Another hesitated. "That medal, it was for pulling people out, wasn't it?" Mira considered the question. "It was for staying," she said. "When leaving would have been easier." The answer seemed to settle something. She climbed into the vehicle without looking back. As the base receded behind her, Mira allowed herself a moment of stillness. The laughter from the first day felt distant now. So did the silence that followed it. What remained was simpler, understanding. The medal hadn't changed who she was. It had revealed who others were willing to become when forced to confront their assumptions. She looked down at her hands, steady and unmarked in appearance, and thought of how many decisions were invisible once the moment passed. That was fine. She didn't need to be seen to serve. The next assignment would come soon enough, somewhere else. Another room. Another set of quiet judgments waiting to be corrected. She would walk into it the same way she always had, prepared, and if they laughed or whispered or wondered, she would let them, because truth didn't rush. It arrived when it was ready, and when it did, it had a way of bringing everyone to attention, without ever asking. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.